and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War.
So Trump came up with this brilliant plan to fix Ukraine. Send Marco Rubio to Saudi Arabia without inviting Ukraine. Yes, you heard that right. The country Trump wants to make peace for wasn't even invited to the talks. It's like planning a surprise birthday party, but forgetting to invite the birthday person. Colbert just destroyed Trump's logic, and Trump's reaction was exactly what you'd expect from an orange man-child who can't handle criticism. Quick favor before we move on. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 92% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great, thank you so much for your support. Now back to the video. Can you imagine planning a birthday party but forgetting to invite the birthday person? Well, Trump just did exactly that with international diplomacy, in what might be the weirdest diplomatic move since the last weird Trump diplomatic move. Our former president decided to cook up a peace plan for Ukraine, without actually inviting Ukraine to the table.
Donald Trump has said in this latest post, he has called Volodymyr Zelensky a successful comedian, then complains about the amount of money. And it is that too much US money has been spent on Ukraine. He blames President Biden for not demanding what he says is equalization.
Last week, Trump sent Senator Marco Rubio on a surprise mission to Saudi Arabia to discuss ending the Ukraine-Russia war. The only small problem? He completely forgot to include the country that's actually being invaded. That's right. Trump thought the best way to solve Ukraine's problems was to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's like planning an intervention for someone's drinking problem, but inviting only their distant relatives who've never seen them drunk. Stephen Colbert absolutely demolished Trump over this bizarre diplomatic strategy on his show. Trump's peace plan is like planning a surprise party where you don't invite the birthday boy because you're discussing whether to get him a cake or just let the neighbor eat his house, Colbert joked, his eyebrows practically reaching the studio ceiling. The late-night host didn't stop there.
Message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed.
And so it continues, ... The President of the United States saying that President Zelensky, who is in charge of a country fighting off a Russian invasion, has done a terrible job.
He went on to compare Trump's diplomacy skills to a toddler trying to perform brain surgery with a plastic spoon. Ouch. The studio audience was practically rolling in the aisles, as Colbert pointed out that in the history of international diplomacy, excluding the country that's being discussed is generally considered a bit of a no-no. What makes this even more ridiculous is that peace talks about Ukraine without Ukraine makes about as much sense as a fish riding a bicycle. Imagine Russia and Saudi Arabia just casually deciding Ukraine's fate while President Zelensky sits at home, wondering why his phone isn't ringing. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. When reporters questioned this strange approach, Trump's defense was even more bizarre. He claimed he didn't want to invite Ukraine because it should be a surprise. A surprise? What exactly would be the surprise here? Surprise, Ukraine. We've been talking about your future without you. Aren't you thrilled? It's like planning someone's wedding without telling them who they're marrying. Even some Republicans are quietly distancing themselves from this diplomatic disaster. One anonymous GOP senator reportedly told a journalist that this was the diplomatic equivalent of showing up to a job interview wearing your pajamas.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Donald Trump has said in this latest post, he has called Volodymyr Zelensky a successful comedian, then complains about the amount of money.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement from your own team. But why exactly did the Orange Menace decide Ukraine shouldn't be at the table for talks about their own country? Well, hold on to your hats, folks, because his explanation is a doozy. According to Trump, Ukraine should have ended the war 3 years ago. Yes, you heard that right. The country that was invaded should have just stopped being invaded? By that logic, if someone breaks into your house, it's your fault for not convincing them to leave sooner. What Trump conveniently forgets, or chooses to ignore, is that Russia was the one who invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. Ukraine didn't wake up one morning and decide, you know what would be fun? Getting bombed and having our cities destroyed. They were defending themselves against an aggressor. Blaming Ukraine for not ending a war they didn't start is like blaming someone for not stopping their own mugging fast enough. Colbert summed it up perfectly when he said, Trump's understanding of the Ukraine conflict is like his understanding of healthy eating, completely backward and potentially deadly. The audience erupted in laughter, but there's a terrifying truth behind the joke. But wait, Trump's bizarre diplomatic adventure gets even weirder. When pressed further about his approach, he suggested that the war continues because Ukraine is being stubborn and ungrateful for all the help they've received. This from the man who tried to withhold military aid from Ukraine unless they dug up dirt on his political opponents.
It is that too much US money has been spent on Ukraine. He blames President Biden for not demanding what he says is equalization.
And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years.
Talk about having a selective memory. This half-baked peace plan reveals something deeply troubling about Trump's worldview. He seems to have more sympathy for the invader than the invaded, more concern for Russia's interests than for a democratic ally under attack. And as we're about to see, his explanations for who's really to blame for this war venture into territory so bizarre that even fantasy writers would reject the plot as too unrealistic. Just when you thought Trump's grasp on reality couldn't get any looser, he's now dragging Middle-earth into international politics. In a truly mind-boggling twist, our former president has decided that the best way to explain who's really responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine is through Lord of the Rings references, and not even accurate ones at that. While the rest of the world watched Russia send tanks across Ukraine's border, Trump has apparently been watching fantasy movies and getting some very strange ideas. He shocked listeners by claiming that Ukraine actually started the war, boldly stating, "You should have ended it 3 years ago. You should have never started it." That's right. In Trump's alternate universe, the country that got invaded is somehow the aggressor. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on how you feel about mixing deadly serious geopolitical conflicts with fantasy novels. Trump decided to double down on his bizarre take by comparing Ukraine to those wicked hobbits for stealing that ring from Sauron.
I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed and no city would have been demolished. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Yes, you heard that correctly. In Trump's world, Ukraine is the villain for defending itself against invasion? The Lord of the Rings reference might have been confusing enough on its own, but Trump didn't stop there. He went on to describe Sauron, the literal embodiment of evil in Tolkien's universe, the Dark Lord with the flaming eye who wants to enslave all of Middle-earth, as a very good friend of mine, big guy, tears in his flaming eye. I'm not making this up. The former president of the United States just called one of fiction's most notorious villains his very good friend, while using him as a stand-in for Vladimir Putin. If you're scratching your head right now, join the club. Stephen Colbert's reaction to this Lord of the Rings analogy was priceless. His facial expressions throughout the segment perfectly captured what most of us were thinking, a mixture of disbelief, horror, and the kind of laughter you can only muster when reality has become so absurd that your brain doesn't know how else to respond. Colbert mercilessly mocked Trump's complete reversal of reality, pointing out the obvious: that comparing Ukraine to thieving hobbits while casting Russia as the wronged party is about as backward as claiming Voldemort was just misunderstood, or that Darth Vader was the real hero of Star Wars. The late-night host skillfully highlighted how utterly ridiculous it is to use a fantasy reference to explain a serious conflict, especially when you get the moral of the story completely backward. But beneath the comedy lies something genuinely disturbing. Trump's fantasy world explanation reveals a deeply troubling pro-Russia stance that experts have been warning about for years. By flipping the victim and aggressor, Trump isn't just showing a lack of understanding. He's actively promoting Russian propaganda that attempts to justify their illegal invasion. International relations experts have criticized Trump's comments, pointing out that his claims about Ukraine's responsibility are not just slightly off, they're factually incorrect and dangerously misleading. It's like claiming that someone who gets punched in the face started the fight by having a punchable face. The reality, which Trump seems determined to ignore, is that Russia invaded a sovereign nation, not the other way around. What makes this whole situation even more bizarre is that Trump isn't just some random person sharing strange opinions on social media. He's a former president who could potentially be president again, which makes his complete misunderstanding of a major international conflict genuinely alarming. If he can't recognize who the aggressor is in a straightforward case of one country invading another, what other basic realities might he struggle with? The irony meter just exploded. From failing to understand basic geopolitics, Trump moved on to career counseling, mocking Zelensky as merely a modestly successful comedian. When a man who turned the presidency into an unintentional comedy special starts critiquing another leader's humor credentials, you know we've entered a whole new dimension of irony. Let's break this down. Donnie Diapers, after getting basic facts wrong about who invaded whom, decided to throw shade at President Zelensky's previous career. Trump called him a modestly successful comedian, which is sort of like watching a guy with a fake spray tan and raccoon eyes criticizing someone else's makeup routine. The self-awareness level here is hovering somewhere between 0 and -12. What makes this particularly rich is that before becoming Ukraine's wartime president, Zelensky actually was a legitimately successful comedian and actor. He starred in a popular TV show called Servant of the People, where he played, get this, a regular guy who unexpectedly becomes president of Ukraine. Talk about life imitating art. Meanwhile, Trump's comedy career consisted mainly of becoming the punchline to thousands of jokes he never intended to create. Stephen Colbert couldn't resist pointing out this delicious irony. While the exact scene of Colbert's studio reaction isn't available to us, you can just imagine him staring into the camera with that signature raised eyebrow, letting the absurdity sink in. Here's a former game show host who accidentally stumbled into politics criticizing an actual entertainer who deliberately transitioned to leadership. The comparison is even more striking when you consider the trajectories of both men. Zelensky went from making people laugh intentionally to becoming a globally respected wartime leader defending his nation against an invasion. Trump went from bankruptcy to accidentally becoming the world's most powerful meme generator while sitting in the Oval Office. But Trump didn't stop at just insulting Zelensky's former career. He accused the Ukrainian president of pulling off some kind of elaborate scam, claiming Zelensky manipulated America into spending $350 billion on a war that couldn't be won. This accusation prompted Colbert to deliver a reality check. Defending your country when it gets invaded isn't some kind of con job, it's literally what any nation would do. It's as if Grumpy Trumpy thinks Ukraine should have just rolled over and let Russia walk in. Sorry, Putin, help yourself to our country. Would you like some borscht while you're annexing our territory? That's not how sovereignty works. But Trump seems to think international relations should function like one of his business deals. Everyone gets screwed except him. Trump's so-called peace plan doesn't inspire much confidence either. His diplomatic strategy appears to be that Russia maybe will give up a lot, maybe they won't. That's not a plan. That's not even a coherent thought. That's the international relations equivalent of, let's see what happens, which might work when you're deciding whether to order dessert, but falls a bit short when people's lives and the future of democratic nations are at stake. The orange turd's approach to diplomacy is about as useful as trying to put out a house fire with a squirt gun, or as Colbert brilliantly suggested, it's like using a fork to eat soup. You can try it, but you're going to make a mess and end up hungry. What's particularly concerning is that this isn't just some random guy spouting nonsense on the internet. This is a former president who wants to be president again, criticizing a leader who gave up entertainment to defend his country. One man traded punchlines for principles, while the other traded principles for punchlines. So there you have it, folks. The diplomatic genius who thinks he can solve a war by talking to everyone except the country being invaded. Trump's plan isn't just bad diplomacy, it's dangerous fantasy. International experts have slammed this approach, warning that excluding Ukraine from peace talks undermines basic diplomatic principles and threatens global stability. It's like trying to referee a boxing match while blindfolding one of the fighters. What makes Colbert's takedown so perfect is that they use humor to expose the absurdity while highlighting the serious consequences. When someone with nuclear codes can't grasp who invaded whom, laughter becomes our coping mechanism. Next time you're planning world peace, or just a birthday party, remember the golden rule. Maybe, just maybe, invite the people actually involved. Revolutionary concept, I know.